Mr. Braun for the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Could I have an extra 2 minutes?
Granted, without objection.
May not need it, but hate to be rushed. So, before I get into this specific issue, I just wanted to remind especially the new members of the purpose of the Finance Committee, because I want to make it clear what we are saying in our lack of a recommendation. Maybe I'll just lead off with the fact that the Finance Committee voted 6-0 with one vacancy to make no recommendation on this issue. But I want to explain why. First of all, the Finance Committee is a committee of town meeting. We're here to serve you, basically, as trying to keep an eye on the town's finances in general, and then weigh potential financial impacts of articles such as this, any article, actually. And sometimes that's easy, and sometimes that's very difficult, especially, for a volunteer board with only limited amount of time and energy to do the research that would really be required to make accurate predictions. So here's why we didn't make a recommendation, basically. So it's not possible to predict the impacts of inclusionary zoning with any accuracy. It's not clear, for example, whether the proposed changes are going to promote, hinder, or have no effect on the development of more housing in town. Inclusionary zoning works in some towns. We did enough research to find that it does work sometimes. It does not work other times. In fact, I think about 40% of the towns in the state that have inclusionary zoning bylaws are just like Amherst. There have not been actually new housing created. But it does work some places. The problem is that the bylaws themselves are different in every town, and so it's very hard to compare and to draw any lessons from that. So we can't predict in advance whether or not this bylaw is going to promote or hinder new housing development. Another critical factor is who's going to end up living in both the market rate and below market rate units in any of these developments. The net economic benefit to the town of new housing units depends on how much new tax revenue those units generate compared with how many town services the people in those units require. So, as I believe somebody mentioned in a previous meeting here, if you have housing units that are with lots of children in the public schools, the net benefit to the town may actually be negative. On the other hand, if you have, and the same might be true if the development is going to require the town to build new roads or sewers. Even if we thought that inclusionary zoning was going to develop or result in more housing units, whether that would be a net plus or minus to the town is still not possible to be known, because we don't know who's going to live there and what the economic pluses or minuses are going to be on that. And finally, and this is kind of important, as you'll hear, the Finance Committee in general is in favor of the kind of flexibilities that are going to be discussed in Article 21. That would give the town manager and the select board some flexibility in the provision of property tax incentives and other kinds of offsets to developers. But that introduces yet another complexity into the economic calculus of whether or not inclusionary zoning is going to be plus or minus for the town. In other words, we don't know in advance what the kinds of incentives might be, how long those incentives might last. Am I out of time?
Excuse me, no, you're not. Stand so we know who it is, and microphone, please.
Michael Birtwistle, Precinct 2. I think the speaker is really speaking to Article 21 rather than Article 22.
Okay, I guess it's a fine point of order. I should have made this clear at the beginning. I am going to allow some leeway on this, even though they are different and the differences have been made clear. The connections have also been made clear, and the relationship between the two has been made clear. So I am going to give leeway, particularly if it means that less time will be taken later for speaking. So point of order is understood, but I'm going to allow the speaker to continue speaking. You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I agree with the point, basically, but it is related because I just want to make it clear that even though the Finance Committee was in favor, is in favor of Article 21, that does not mean that we're automatically in favor of, 22. And that those kind of incentives make it all the more difficult to make any predictions about the economic impact of inclusionary zoning. So for all of those reasons, as I said, the Finance Committee makes no recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. As has already been stated, this is a change to the zoning bylaw, which requires a 2/3 vote to pass.